Getting stuff scratched off my to-do list pretty good. Got the seatbelt attach holes in the back panel there for the back seat, and this has a rear seat kit in it, so you can add 180 pounds baggage back there in the aft baggage compartment. So it has attachments for seatbelt back there too, and I've got those drilled out of the panel, the interior panels, so we can access those and tie those in. The defroster tubing, I got it all set up. The doors, I got the hinges set up on those. Window trim, I still need to do the window trim. And the windows, I got to cut those out yet, but I got the channel in that left side window there. The voltage regulator and whatnot is put on. Back seat heat is on the back burner for now. I've got a different idea on that, but a map pocket, I got to fit it into that right side panel. Flap handle, of course, I've been working on it. So I've took the tail strakes off. I've got to strip those and repaint those, but that can be done later. There's no point in worrying about that until I get ready to paint. So that brings us down to the primer. This is the primer. You've got a couple of O-rings in there. This plunger fits down in that tube, and you just there's a lock on it here. This is nut screws down to hold it on, and there's a little pin in this primer to hold it closed, and you twist it one way or the other to latch it closed. If you don't have that thing closed all the way, the engine can draw fuel through the primer, and it can cause a rough running engine. Don't ask me how I know that. But anyway, I need to work on the primer. I want to replace these O-rings, and look down in that barrel there. It had a little bit of a wear in it. I don't know whether that's chrome or the aluminum flaking off or whatever, just normal wear. Well, I want to clean that up a little bit, put new O-rings on that, and lube it. I always, the last couple of years, I had a little bit of an avgas odor in the airplane off and on, and I searched it and searched it and searched it, couldn't figure out what it was. We get someone, we fill the fuel tanks up and then go flying, and you go level, and I'd overfill them, and so we get a little bit of fuel in the wing and on top of the fuel tanks, and I thought it was that, or wasn't quite sure. But when I opened that up, I could see that this tube right here, this is where the primer, well, this is the inlet right here, but I could see where it was leaking. You can see the discoloration on it. It's dark right now, but it was, you could really see it when I took it off with the blue stain and stuff from the fuel. So that fitting was leaking. Well, anyway, that's next up on the list is getting that done. That won't take much for that. There's a washer here that this nut fits on the back side of the instrument panel and adjusts how far the primer sticks out of the instrument panel, or how thick of a panel that you have it mounted in. And then you have 1/8 inch primer lines going here. This is the inlet. This comes out of that gascolator that we put on earlier, and then this would be the outlet here, and that would go out to the engine. And I have primer injectors on each one of the cylinders, all 4 cylinders. One of the things that some airplanes have is they only have a primer going in, sometimes only into the intake tube itself, sometimes into just one cylinder, and it gets to be kind of hard to start sometimes when it's closed, when it's cold. The best way I found to do that on the engine was to go ahead and shoot some fuel through the primer, which would go into the intake of one cylinder or into the intake tube on one side itself. Shoot some fuel in there, and then pull the throttle, or pull the propeller through a few times to get that fuel to vaporize and to mix and get into all of the cylinders, depending on how many you have, whether it's 2, 4, or 6. But that gets fuel and spread into all the cylinders, and it makes it start better when it's cold. I haven't had that problem with this one because I've got fuel injected into all 4 cylinders, and it doesn't take much fuel to pump in there to get it started. It only takes 1 pump, or sometimes 2 if it's real cold, to to get it to start. Sometimes you have to wait for a minute or two after you prime it to get the fuel to vaporize if it's cold. I've got the old lines right here, and you can see how the fuel is leaked out on this one and stained this line where it comes back here. On this one here goes on out to the engine. And there's nothing wrong with these lines, they're fine, but copper work hardens from the vibration and stuff, and those have been in that airplane for 15 years, so it's cheaper to go ahead and replace those than it is to worry about having a cracked line somewhere down the road. In fact, it's a good idea just to replace copper lines every so often, no matter what. I've known of at least 2 airplanes that have had to have emergency landings because a copper line failed. One of them was, well, I think both of them were fuel pressure lines coming through from the engine into the instrument panel. I took the primer down to the shop and just put it in the ultrasonic cleaner and let it soak in there for a few days. I'd go by every once in a while and turn the cleaner on and let it ultrason, whatever you want to call it. I did that because these, well, I wanted to get it cleaned up. It had some stuff on it, and that helped clean it up inside and out. That loosens all the crud up that's inside. I put paint thinner in the ultrasonic cleaner. You're not supposed to use paint thinner or anything flammable in it. According to the instructions, you're just supposed to use detergent or something, but paint thinner works better for some of this stuff, for cleaning it up. Anyway, that helps loosen up the gookumpucky that was in on the threads on these nipples. Now, one of these nipples was leaking, and I don't know for sure whether it was the pipe thread portion leaking or the nipple, the ferrule and the nut was leaking on it. I think it was the tubing where it attaches on that was leaking in the ferrule, but I'm not 100% sure. So I went ahead and took it down there and soaked it for a while, and then took these nipples out, cleaned them up, and now I can put that back together with some thread sealant. I did the same thing with this sump on this gascolator. I let it soak in there for a while, and then took this this plug, which is a quick drain or a drain, out, and I had to soak it for a while to get the stuff loosened up on it to get it out. But I took it out, put it on the wire wheel, and cleaned it up, polished it up a little bit, and then put a new O-ring on it. And I'll put that together at the same time with some thread sealant. I took one of the O-rings off of the plunger on the primer and went down to the hardware store, the parts store, and got a couple new O-rings. So I'll change those, and I'm going to lube those up and everything up with some DC4, some Dow Corning 4 silicone lubricant. And alright, everything's all back together. This primer just fits together like that, and then it goes in, and then this will screw in on that. This nut here will screw into the back of the instrument panel, and that's the primer. Then there's a slot in this collar right here that primer knob goes into to lock it closed. Well, I can put this back in the airframe now, back in the instrument panel, and set it up. Well, we got the drain back in the gascolator, and I got it turned so that the ears parallel with the firewall instead of sticking out, so that way they won't stick out quite so far. Okay, the primer's in. You don't have to move it again. That'll be the last time it has to be in or out of there, I hope. Looks pretty good. Just don't look much different than it did before. Here's what it looks like on the back side of the instrument panel. Got it in just a little bit of an angle here, and run this fuel line up off of here and curl it around and then down out. And this one is just canted just a little bit off of this cross piece here, so we can get the line in there, and then it can come up and out. The 1/8 inch line is pretty flexible. Well, it's not flexible, but it can be bent, and put a strain relief bends in it anyway.